Welcome to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at the age of 8, and since then, I've navigated school, work, and leadership through a lens of neurodiversity, allowing me to create a set of strategies and insights to help neurodiverse professionals thrive. Tune in each episode for real-life scenarios, tools that bridge the gap between employees and employers. If you're a company leader, fostering inclusion, or a neurodiverse professional seeking support, then you are in the right place. Through this podcast, we'll grow together and explore what it means to have work be challenging and not hard. Let's break down the stigmas, boost productivity, and celebrate the strengths that help you feel empowered to say, I am capable. Welcome back to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. And I'm really excited that you are back for this conversation because we're going to be talking about what it's like to have an early diagnosis or a late diagnosis. And when I thought about having this entire episode, I thought about how much advocacy I have been doing my whole life, trying to get people who likely had learning disabilities, ADHD, who fit in this neurodiverse category, to have access to resources and to have access to so much of the knowledge that I had. It has given me so much confidence to know so much more about myself than I had previous to not knowing I had this diagnosis. And when I talk to people who are newly diagnosed, a lot of the times they are looking to me and asking, what was it like to have resources? What was I missing? And they get really frustrated and they find that they're maybe not as confident in their skills and their strengths. And I find it so hard to have these conversations knowing currently what this administration is doing to the Department of Education and Special Education, because I feel like there are not going to be nearly as many diagnoses early on and support and resources available to kids. And we are going to have an entire generation who is going to struggle in the workplace because they don't have those resources and support. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what it was like to have resources, even though not every day and every moment of it was beautiful and perfect. But I want you to see the realities of what it was like to have a diagnosis, what support and resources look like, and talk about where the challenges are when you are not diagnosed until adulthood. And as I've talked about what it's like to have resources and support and building those strengths around myself, it's how I build my team and my support system for what I do every day. And that's why every episode we've mentioned that I have a team member of mine asking me questions, kind of keeping me accountable to all the things that we are going to talk about. So today I'm bringing on Naomi, who has, if you were watching last episode, know that she asked our last question for the See It Through My Eyes portion. But Naomi has been working for me for about a year, and she is my Gen Z ear to the door. She is so helpful for me to understand what the next generation is really looking for when it comes to understanding neurodivergencies, but also understanding what the work dynamic really looks like. She helps me with my social media and keeps me trendy. So I'm really excited she is here today to ask me questions and, again, hold me accountable to helping all of you learn more.
Thanks, Alex. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm excited to dive right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
When we talked about in the last episode, it was my question. So I was diagnosed in college. And so I'm still learning about myself every day and kind of looking back at times of my life where I'm like, oh, was ADHD. And like this whole time kind of, not having the resources. And like you were just saying, I think a lot of us assume that if were diagnosed early and you had resources, it makes everything automatically easier. And it sounds like it's kind of a double-edged sword in some ways. And I'm curious about your experience with that, being diagnosed early.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's really important for me to help people understand that an early diagnosis is important. It is extremely important to your understanding of yourself and building in tools at a young age. It's now muscle memory in terms of how I learn, how I think, and how I apply everything that I do. But it wasn't the prettiest picture, as I mentioned, all the time. As someone who was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at 8, I had teachers every single year who would pinpoint me as the troubling one because I had to learn differently, or they had to set something up differently in the class and I was a burden to them. Not to say that it was every teacher, but I had amazing, amazing teachers available to me. And the resources that were provided for me are what allowed me to even graduate middle school. I'm telling you right now, I would not have graduated even middle school without some of these resources. When it came to taking a test, I was in a separate testing location. I had double time. My tests were read to me. My Scantrons were filled out by another person. I didn't have to take a foreign language because if you are dyslexic, let me tell you, spelling a word in a different language and putting an accent in a different place makes it an entirely different word. As you know, because you are living in Spain, you understand, and teaching Spanish, that could be really challenging. So I had so much of that taken off of my plate to allow me to really stay on par with a lot of people and allow me to graduate. And I am so grateful for that. But trying to figure out why and how I was going to kind of advocate for myself at a young age, I had to build those skills at a really young age because I had teachers who kind of pushed back, and it built in skills that I didn't necessarily know that I needed that I'm still applying today. So even if it was good or bad, it still gave me a skill set that is invaluable to what I do today and how I help other people.
Yeah, and you're in the minority because 75% of adults with ADHD were not diagnosed as children,
Mm-hmm.
like me, and spent many years thinking that they weren't trying hard enough and they just couldn't do it and like just didn't naturally have certain skills. And so how does that late diagnosis, you think, affect people's confidence and the way they approach their work?
I am always impressed when people tell me that they are late diagnosed because it is like climbing up a mountain with rocks in your backpack and nobody is there to help you kind of take it off your back. You're just being told, move faster, climb harder, do all of these things as if you weren't already trying so hard. And then you're looking around and thinking, well, what's in everyone else's backpack? Did they have this many water bottles, this many rocks, this much supplies? How do they do it? And it is so frustrating when I see people who are doing that. And I'm like, this is why people, quote unquote, call you resilient. And resilience is such a it's such a frustrating word to me. I have such a love-hate relationship with that terminology because resilience is not something you are choosing to be. It's something you are forced to be. And when you are constantly overcompensating and then don't have the knowledge of why you were struggling or what tools were even available, it just sits with your psyche this whole time thinking there's something wrong with me. And so a lot of times I meet people who are late diagnosed and they're really struggling with their confidence. They're not even sure where their skill sets are, but they'll tell me they are extremely driven, they're smart, they're just frustrated, they're burnt out, and they don't know why. And here I am giving them some tools and kind of like cracking that shell a little bit and opening that backpack and taking out some of those rocks and letting them know they don't have to hold it all the time, that there are support. There is support, that there is resources available that can make everything that they're doing easier. We just have to find a way in which it works for them. And so I'm finding people in a place of that, but I'm also like deconstructing a lot of the language and things that have been said to them over the years. And I would say that also goes for the people who were early diagnosed, that they are unpacking a lot of the negative language that people have said to them of just like, you're not smart enough or you're not trying hard enough. That hurts. It is so painful. And even if you are digging it as far back as I am, I can tell you for me, that's like fourth grade. I know that's still there. That pain is still there. And it's still moving forward, even though you're building in those tools. The scars are there. The scar tissue's there. So it's hard. It's like dealing with the 12 stages of grief, honestly, in terms of a new diagnosis and trying to put the pieces back together and kind of give yourself some hugging and love in between of trying to move forward.
Yeah, that really resonates. And especially being my age and like, newly entering the workforce, I'm curious from a corporate perspective, why does it matter if an employee is newly diagnosed or had an early diagnosis? How does that show up at work?
That's a great question. When it comes to advocating for yourself in the workplace, whether you are newly diagnosed or you're someone who is late diagnosed, understanding who you are, where your strengths lie, what support looks like for you, comes in even at the interview phase. you start to filter out what are places that are going to be supportive of the way you think and learn. I've always mentioned that I think it is almost more important to be in the right environment and have a supportive environment than it is for you to look at the actual job title itself. Because people who are neurodivergent are incredibly bright. They have so many unique skills in this space, but finding the right environment that's going to allow them to open up and ask questions or adjust their hours in a way that is supportive of that is going to change what version of them you see. So when you're late diagnosed, it's hard for you to know what is it that career version of you really needs versus someone who might have had that foundation and knows a little bit about what they needed, but they might have really only known what that looked like in the school setting. So there is always some, trembling water there in terms of what that looks like. And I really unpack that a lot with people as they're trying to figure out how to navigate the workplace. But that foundational piece of who are you at your core and what does support look like for you is really how we build into the workplace.
Yeah. And going off that, we're going to move on to our next segment called See It Through My Eyes. Well, we'll hear directly from someone with lived experience. And today's question comes from a familiar face for Alex, Abby, who used to work for Alex. She submitted a question and about her early diagnosis to see what Alex has to say.
Hi, Alex. My name's Abby. I was diagnosed really early in life with ADHD, and I had support all throughout my primary school, through college, from tutors to teachers to my parents. And I always had someone advocating for me and what I needed and how I could be set up to win. So when I graduated college and I started working in the real world, it was a harsh wake-up call that no one is doing that for me anymore. So my question for you is, what advice do you have for young people or older people entering the workforce and how to make work for them, how to approach the conversation of getting support at work and setting themselves up to win? Thanks.
Thank you, Abby. I'm so glad you actually asked that question, more specifically because this is exactly why I started my business. Because as someone who was graduating from college and starting in the workplace, if you've listened to other episodes, you know that I created a mentor retention program for students with disabilities at Indiana University. So not only did I know how to advocate for myself, I knew how to support other people in advocating for themselves. And what I think people don't understand about having an early diagnosis and having the support is that exact point, which was you might have had people advocating for yourself. You might have had that structure of support already built into what you were doing every day. And now you're expected to figure it out on your own. But the problem is school and workplaces, it's apples and oranges in terms of what support looks like for you. I was using the example of having a separate testing location and having double time on my tests, and Scantrons were read to me and things like that. What does that look like when you are in the workplace? It was really the constant question I asked myself. And I remember having this conversation with my first boss, like, hey, I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD. And he looked at me and said, well, that's a liability. Why are you telling me this? And it's like, I didn't know how to have that filtered conversation. So I'm really glad you asked this, Abby, because I think what we need to know at the core is what works for you. And it's hard to know when you've never really been in the workplace before, or you have been in the workplace before and you are still trying to figure out what is it that works for you. I find that number one factor is thinking about the environment. If you are working in a workspace, let's say you are either in a hybrid position or you are full-time in the office, what does your physical office space look like? And how is that going to set you up for success? If it is one of those scenarios where it's open all the time, can you ask for headphones or loop headphones? Or can you ask to be in a position where you're in a corner that doesn't get a lot of foot traffic so that you can pay attention? Can you adjust your hours so that you have quieter hours in terms of when you're doing it? If there are, hybrid scenarios, can you keep the work that you're doing in the office strictly to the meetings, the in-person interactions that are important and have the at-home days be focused on the work that you are actually taking home. That way you can really separate your time. It's really hard to go into these conversations because you're probably coming at it scared in a way, thinking, are they going to know that I have ADHD? Are they going to know that I have learning disabilities? These types of requests maybe sound unusual, but the truth is it's not. Everybody is advocating for themselves, regardless of whether they have a learning disability, whether they have ADHD, or whether they have kids at home and they're trying to adjust their hours to make sure they're getting the best version of themselves. So no, they want the best version of you. They want you to be successful. So if you are telling them, what success looks like for me is, and then label some of those, you're going into that conversation knowing what you want out of it. When I was 22 years old and having that conversation and I just said, hey, I have dyslexia and ADHD, and he said, that's a liability, why are you telling me? It's because I gave him no information as to what support looked like for me. What would have been helpful for me to be successful in this position? Hindsight's 2020, I could have told him 100 things that would have made that position a lot easier for me instead of overcompensating for what I was doing. But you have to go in knowing what you want out of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned being, that 22-year-old trying to navigate all of this, having support your whole life and it disappearing when you enter the workforce. And I'm curious what that looks like when you're asking for support from, people who have been in the industry that you're in for 13 plus years and they feel like they have seniority and they were never entitled to some of these accommodations that you're advocating for. How would you suggest navigating that discussion without putting people in a position where they feel threatened by you?
I think that is also a really good question. I get this question a lot in terms of I've been newly diagnosed and now I'm asking for resources when I've been doing the job for all this time. Like, what is wrong with you? You've done this job. You've been doing it. Why is it harder for you now all of a sudden? And to that I say, why are we doing things the same way all the time? Just because we've done something a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it was the most efficient way. I mean, something that is really important to the evolution of the workspace is how much we are implementing new technology and new resources and to do things better. We're not using typewriters in our workspaces. We're not using desktop computers anymore. We're using laptops and tablets and we're using our iPhones and so much technology is being implemented. So I would say to you, hold back the anxiety in terms of having a conversation and thinking like they might think of me differently. Again, you want to go in knowing what you want out of this conversation. So if you're been doing the job for many years, you could say, I've been thinking about how we can do this differently that would be more efficient. Talk about different ways in which you can implement new tools, whether it's just for you or people on your team who might also benefit from different resources to make this more efficient. Or I've been thinking about having different check-ins with different teams to make sure we're all on the same dynamic, or that we're having our meetings recorded so nobody's missing it. When you're implementing these conversations, you're implementing resources that are available to everybody that are going to be helpful to you, but also make you more efficient. And that should be the end goal of the conversation, is to let them know that you're not necessarily asking because you want to disclose that you have a disability now, but it's more that you're trying to figure out ways to relieve the stress of your day-to-day responsibilities and do things better.
Yeah, so speaking now about people who are newly diagnosed or diagnosed later in life, studies show that women are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD later in life than men. What are some reasons that you think go into that about people being undiagnosed for so long?
So much. So many people who are getting diagnosed now are getting diagnosed, well, women in particular are seen as smart and ambitious. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend whose daughter has ADHD and she's in 5th grade and she has a 504 plan. If you there's a whole episode I can talk about when it comes to what educational systems look like in terms of a 504 plan versus an individualized education program. But basically she couldn't get all of the resources available to her because she had ADHD and she wasn't failing in school and she was doing well, so therefore they didn't need to implement any other resources for her. women and girls are told to act a certain way, to show up in a certain way. And so they kind of go past. But I have to tell you, those are the smartest, most ambitious, most driven people I work with. They end up in the C-suite every time, guns a-blazing, because they have really tried to make so many things work for them and get to this point. That doesn't make it easier. And a lot of the times when those diagnoses happen later in life, they're also being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, so many different types of mental health challenges. Because again, if you think of that backpack scenario with all those rocks, not only are those rocks filled with all the tasks that they have to do on their own without asking for help, without having those resources, they're also taking the negativity, and those rocks are sitting with them this whole time. So they're getting diagnosed later. You also have just pure racism, why so many people of color are getting diagnosed later in life, because they are showing the signs in the same way that their white counterparts are being diagnosed. They're just not being diagnosed in the same way. What is written in the DSM is typically seen in little boys who are hyperactive. And so when you can see it, you understand it, and therefore you get diagnosed. People who are inattentive, who are maybe spacing out, who still get by, often don't get the diagnosis until later.
Yeah, and you were speaking earlier about your love-hate relationship with the word resilience. I think we put people in these positions and, applaud them when really we should be catching it early on.
Yeah, it makes me so mad. I can't even tell you how many times people tell me, like, you're so resilient. I was like, why am I wearing that as a badge of honor? You have no idea how exhausting that terminology is. And I think it's okay to say, I'm tired. I'm tired of having to fight so hard for something that shouldn't have to be so hard.
Right. And can you speak a little bit more about, the grief and anger people might feel at not catching an earlier intervention and how that might show up in a corporate space?
You're saying from someone who is late diagnosed, or are you saying someone who's early diagnosed?
From someone who just got diagnosis and has been in a role and a position for many years and has been struggling, and now are getting all these epiphanies about themselves and now have to completely rework their role. What is their experience usually look like?
When it comes to having those conversations, I also are talking to, I'll put women, for example, in that scenario, especially because they are kind of in the C-suite at that point and they are climbing the ladder and doing all of these things that are so hard for them and overcompensating. Not only are they making the realization for themselves, but they are also leading the charge in terms of how we can do things differently in the workplace, how we can set up our teams, how we can set up our environment to help people thrive. That it's not necessarily that you are the one who holds the answer or the people above you are the ones that hold all the answer. It's how, as a collective, can we support each other in making sure that we are working more efficiently, that we are really taking in everyone's best skill set. Everyone's structure is needed into how we are making our end product and end results. That's where that productivity piece comes into play. And so I say to people when they're in that role of how can you take leadership and ownership of not just your workspace and the changes you feel like are needed to be implemented for yourself, but how can you really take charge in the conversation and say, like, I'm noticing this. I want to be able to make this better, not for myself, but for everybody else, and show up in that way. I have a current client who is late diagnosed dyslexic, and he is absolutely brilliant. And he was saying to me, he was like, I haven't really been able to climb the ladder because I've been sitting in these positions kind of overcompensating for myself. And he kind of took charge of this new project and shared his idea, which was, again, brilliant. And everyone looked at him and said, where did that come from? That's amazing. And now he's in charge of this whole project, and he's a little nervous in terms of how he's letting this play out, but he's getting to direct what this looks like and what support is going to look like for all of the different teams and using different tools to be able to do that. But he's really showing people what true leadership can look like. And so I think having that conversation, having that open communication, and having it be in a level of strength and confidence in that makes a big difference of how that becomes less awkward of a conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on a bit. we talked about early diagnosis and late diagnosis and how they come with their unique challenges. So I'm curious about how we can, connect those to build a stronger, more supportive workplace system. And so in your experience, what are some signs that a workplace support system isn't keeping up with an employee's needs? And how can leaders catch that early?
It's so funny. Asking that question, I immediately think of retention rates of what are companies looking like? Because I find that a lot of companies that are actually reaching out to me for support and for help are noticing that they might be firing employees a lot more often than they used to be. They might be noticing that they have a lot more turnover in general because people are not as happy or satisfied in their work role. They might be noticing that there is not as much team camaraderie or a lot of siloed conversations, that things are not really working. And that's when they're coming to me and saying, like, what are we missing here? I'm like, well, what are you missing here? Because a lot of the times when I'm meeting with these companies, I'm asking them, what kind of dynamic conversations are you having, not just at the higher level in terms of your leadership? What is happening at all levels of leadership? Are you having conversations with your managers about how to talk to their different employees and understand different work styles? How are you implementing the employees themselves? Maybe implementing different ERGs that are talking specifically about different types of, let's say, neurodivergencies. Or maybe you're talking about different parenting styles or different things that are bringing together people as whole people who need support and who are looking to find ways to better their skill set. And when you are actually involving people in your space, in your environment, you're going to hear different dynamics of conversations that you realize that you can implement in different ways. There's also so much technology that is being integrated in so many companies right now. ChatGPT, I talk to a lot of people about Google Gemini and different types of AI use. How are you implementing this into the work that you are doing to work smarter and not harder, putting less emphasis on employees who might be neurodivergent, who are having a harder time kind of keeping track of all of the notes or keeping track of the everyday scenarios that are coming its way. I have another corporate client who was telling me that part of the reason they came to me was this employee, who again was very smart, was over-explaining everything to not only the employees, their team, they were also over-explaining to their clients. And their clients were coming back to them and saying, wait, he told us we were doing this, this, and that, but he said he was taking care of it, and why am I getting all of this information? This feels like too much. Let's slow down. Let's understand that everyone has different communication styles, and how we are having this conversation from the top to say, hey, I'm going to use the example, I'll say his name is Joe. Joe, you're giving too much information to the client. Let's scale this back. What is important for them to know as the end result? If you're talking about this from the managerial perspective and you're recognizing tools that are maybe not as helpful, maybe someone who was newly diagnosed who is really struggling to communicate in this way, how can we implement the AI to say, here's the structure of what the client is really looking to get as the end result and answer? How can you build your narrative into that so we don't overwhelm the client? If we are having that type of training, if we are building in that kind of support, you're going to see that employee do really well. And I will tell you that employee has been promoted twice since I did that workshop with them 2 years ago, because his clients were so excited by the end results. He just needed to be massaged a little bit in terms of his language, and we were implementing tools in a way that really suited him. But you have to have a company environment that is supportive to how they work.
Yeah, you mentioned before about ERGs, employee resource groups, and I'm curious if you could expand on that, how it's a key part of an adaptive system for neurodivergent employees.
It's not just adaptive to neurodivergent employees. It's really adaptive to, as I said, so many different dynamics in a company, because you are employing people. Everyone comes with their own baggage, their own support needs, their own life outside of the workspace. And if they feel supported, it is going to be helpful. You're also finding groups of allies in those groups who is willing to tap in and say, hey, again, I'll use the name Joe. Joe, I see you're really struggling with this. I know the best way that I can help you really rein you in and help you give that structure where I didn't see it before. You're basically building in that mentorship support. You're building in those allies who want to help and who want to make this space better, because honestly, it is going to make your entire environment more productive because you have people who are seen as people.
Okay, cool. Before we wrap up, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, just to get to know you a little better and have a little fun with some rapid fire questions.
Oh, I'm excited. All right,
okay,
let's
cool.
go.
First one is, what is your go-to coffee order?
Did you just hear us having this conversation right before we recorded? Oh my God, we just spent the last 10 minutes talking about coffee. And there goes my New York accent that just came out. So my favorite coffee actually recently has been a Freddo espresso, which is a Greek coffee drink, and it is unbelievable. So basically they take espresso and they put it in an ice cream blender, and then they put it back over ice. It is excellent. So I do that with a little splash of half and half. But if it was a cold day, I would probably say a cortado.
Living in Madrid right now, I really miss creative coffees because they're kind of just like coffee with milk. And hearing that sounds incredible.
Oh, it is my go-to spot. Chef's kiss. I can't live without my coffee.
All right, next question. What is something that people would be surprised to learn about you?
Surprised to learn about me? I play a lot of instruments. I sang as a kid, played piano, guitar, and percussion. And I used to write my own music when I was in high school. So didn't come famous because of it, but that was probably my favorite little fun fact about me.
I didn't even know that. That's
so
cool.
See? Even you're learning new things about me.
Yeah. All right, last question. If you had one completely free day with zero responsibilities, how would you spend it?
Oh my God, I could use that day. I could very much use that day. What would I do? I love my husband. I love my kids. I would be in a hotel room by myself, binge watching TV, drinking coffee, maybe getting a massage, doing absolutely nothing and sleeping in. I feel like that is the quintessential millennial mom answer right now, but that feels like pretty on par for me right now.
All right, so those are all the questions that I have. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thanks, Naomi. Thank you for keeping me accountable, because obviously I would have forgotten half of the questions that I said we should talk about. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for listening. If you are a neurodiverse adult navigating challenges in your career, or you're a company looking to become more inclusive, then visit us at capableconsulting.com. To get in touch with us, email us at podcast@capableconsulting.com. Follow us on social media at I Am Capable. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite shows. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the I Am Capable podcast. My mission is to make sure that with the right strategies, neurodiverse employees and their companies are able to increase productivity, improve communication, and create an environment where everyone feels valued. Through one-on-one coaching, I help neurodiverse professionals gain clarity, build confidence, and develop personalized tools to succeed at work. For companies, Capable Consulting offers custom workshops and trainings designed to help your teams better understand and support a dynamic, neurodiverse workforce. Whether you are navigating career shifts, college transitions, or you are looking for community through the ADHD Lounge, I'm here to help. Let's build a workplace where everyone can thrive. Visit capableconsulting.com to learn more and connect with me today.